Welcome to Central Valley Writers Workshop. We have many wonderful authors and writers here in the Valley, as well as many aspiring authors and writers who are all learning to look for tools, tips, and techniques to help improve their writing. Our hope is that as you meet the many authors and writers who are on our show, you'll be able to get a lot of great information about them and how to improve your own writing skills. I'm your host, Claudia Newcorn, author of the award-winning Chrysalis Chronicles of Fairy, magazine editor, and community columnist for the Modesto Bee. Today, as our guest, we have with us Jim Sanders, who has written a wonderful and moving World War II memoir entitled Saving Lives, Saving Memories. I actually had the pleasure of meeting Jim at a number of book signings over the past several years and got his book as a gift from my father, who is likewise a World War II vet. Jim, thank you so very much for taking time to be with us today.
Claudia, thank you. Thank you for asking me. I'm just an old soldier. I've never been a writer. I'm an old soldier, but I was lucky to find someone that could write the book.
Martha Loeffler worked with you on
Martha
the book, correct?
Loeffler, and without Martha Loeffler, there would not be a book.
Why did you choose to work with her in order to create this really autobiographical memoir, as opposed to writing it just yourself?
Well, in the first place, I was not capable of writing it myself. My wife probably could have, but she wasn't about to. And of course, there's words, sentences, I never could have done it. And so I tried someone else to begin with, and they'd written a book. The lady was a whack, and she'd written the story about her time in Japan after the war. So I called her, and she said, "Oh, I just couldn't do it." She said, I'm not capable of doing it now. And of course, we're all older, And so she suggested Martha. And so I knew Martha because she'd written some other articles about me and about the Holocaust and me being in a couple of the camps and so on. And so I called her, and she said, "Yes, Jim, I'm looking for a program. I'm looking for a project." And she said, "But Jim, I'm going to be 90 and you're going to be 85. We've got to get with it right now." So I said, "Okay, I'll start."
Time's a-wasting.
Yeah. And so we did.
Well, it's amazing because you've captured such a critical part of a time in our nation's history, but you brought all of your personal experiences. Can you tell our audience a bit about what the book is about and what inspired you to write it?
The book is really a history of that period. It's a history of the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, and even up into the 50s and later on, because I was invited back by the German government in '95 to all-expense trips back to Weimar, Buchenwald for the 50th commemoration of the liberation of Buchenwald. And so it went clear up even into 2010 and I didn't write the 2010 in the book because we'd already finished it. But I had 2 more tickets back to Weimar, Buchenwald. So this time I took our son, and then I paid for my granddaughter, who was perfect in German. She taught in Austria. She teaches in Memphis, Tennessee, German to American kids. And she was a huge help to all of us. There was, in 2010, there was 13 of us American soldiers that made it back. Now, I don't know what the reason is, but World War II guys are leaving at about the rate of 1,500 to 2,000 a day. So there was 13, but the only interesting part about that after all those years was I met one man named Charles Payne. And I thought I'd heard that name before. And it turned out Charles had his wife with him. And he was Obama's great uncle. And it was his sister, was the grandmother that took care of Obama. So
okay.
I told him, Charlie, I'm going to send you 2 books, one for you and one to give to your nephew when you see him. And he'll learn something about World War II.
Your nephew, the president.
So I made one out to President Obama, and I said, Now read this and you'll learn something about World War II. And I called Charles maybe a month later, and he said, I read your book. He said, I really liked it, but I haven't seen my nephew yet. So he said, he probably never will. He probably never give it to him, but
I
at least,
wouldn't bet
at least
on
it's
that.
there.
And so what are you you're teaching people really. The book has a story in it, but it's also an insight for people younger. Tell us
Right.
about the book.
Well, Martha wanted more than just the war story. She wanted some of my early life, and then she wanted some of my later life. So she was constantly on the computer. Every morning I'd get something. She wanted what she called snippets. So she about my early life, and then of course, and then my later life. But she really, although she was almost 90, she really didn't know a whole lot about World War II and about how armies are set up and all about that stuff. And so I had to constantly be telling her about how this worked and how that worked. And well, you know, she'd ask different things and I'd have to explain it to her. But it worked out fine. I mean, as I say again, there wouldn't be a book without Martha Loeffler. Now, she has a couple of books right now. One is still in publication, but about the Danes that spirited the Jews out of Denmark into Sweden. I think it's called Boats in the Night.
Okay.
But, and the book itself, first of all, you have to have a true story. It's true. Everything in there is true. And I think there was a lot of interesting things that happened. And I told the gentleman out in front, if we had known, if Ray Lockhart was my buddy on the ambulance, he and I were together on the ambulance, if we'd have known that we were part of history or going to be part of history, I'd have kept a journal like my grandfather kept a journal every day. I had a perfect way to keep a journal. This ambulance had a glove compartment, and underneath the glove compartment was a writing board. I could have kept a journal daily, and we could have kept the camera in the glove compartment. But of course we were young, we didn't know what we were getting into, and right away when we hit Normandy, we were in action, and it just didn't occur to us that, hey, someday this could be, you know, something somebody want to listen to. But there's so much stuff that I remembered, and that's another interesting thing. I don't know whether I'm talking too much or not.
No, to the contrary.
When I came home, I'd spent actually 6 months down in the Birmingham General Hospital in Van Nuys while they repaired my knee. When the war ended, I went on sick call because I'd injured my knee, but as long as it was on the ambulance, it didn't matter. It was no problem. But when the war ended, I went in on sick call, and they said, oh, you need an operation on your knee. We're going to have to send you home. So I came home through the medical system all the way to California. But by the time I got home, which would have been in fall of '45, I spent 6 months down there, where if I'd have been here in a hospital and they'd done what they were going to do, I'd have been out in 2 weeks. But I sat down there and ate the best food, saw the shows from Hollywood, and gained about 20 pounds. And it was real luxury. Got to go to the Rose Bowl game, special seats down along the sideline. So, but the interesting thing, when I got home, my wife-to-be was going to finish college that year over at San Jose State. And I talked her into that I should be the one that married her. Now, she was going with a merchant seaman. He was a radio operator. But I finally convinced her that that's the thing we should do. And but I forgot completely about what I'd just been through. I'd just been to the camps. I'd been picking people up on the ground in their little striped pajamas. All these things that happened all the way across Europe, I'd completely forgotten and didn't think about it again, really, until I was at least 50, 55 years old. So this is what I discussed with Dr. Phibbs. I said, what's going on with all these old soldiers? We're remembering all this stuff now. He said, you're on the other side of time. You came home, you wanted to get married, you wanted to start your family, you had to get a job or a business or whatever it was. He said, now your children are grown and you're on the other side of time, going down here. And he said, all this was up here in this computer.
Yeah.
It was up here, but you just turned it loose. He said the thing happened to him, and when he got out of his foot locker, he recalled it all, and he wrote that book, and it's a tremendous book.
How did you work with Martha? I mean, you have these extraordinary memories. What was it like working with a writer and editor at the same time, trying to capture, to sort through all of this information and trying to capture it and put it into a story?
First of all, I'd ask somebody who was a librarian, what do you think I should do first? And they said, well, I think you ought to get a tape recorder and record as much as you can. And I said, well, that sounds like probably a pretty good idea.
Good suggestion.
So eventually I sat down, didn't do it all at once, but it took about 8 hours, and I tried to keep everything running as it happened, which is very difficult to do, because I went like I'd be in England, and I'd go somewhere, and oh, I remember we were back here, we did something else up here. Well, that is difficult. But after I got about 8 hours on tape and got a hold of Martha, I thought, okay, all I have to do now is take this tape over to Martha, and it'll all be good. Oh, no.
What happened?
No. Martha said, you've got to transcribe that whole tape. I need it transcribed. I'm not going to listen to a tape.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
so 4 or 5 of us worked on that. I wasn't very good at it, listening and then trying to transcribe it. But we had one grandson that's a very sharp kid, and he could transcribe and make the words that he wrote sound like me. And eventually we got it done, and we got it over to her, and then through the through the computer, we would go back and forth. And
so would she send you a draft of the manuscript, and then you would read it through and you'd make changes and things like that on it?
We'd do that. And then I had to keep her lined up. Like, you know, I wanted things to run like it happened. You know, like I was in Monterey, and then we eventually were in Colorado, and then we were down in Tennessee Maneuvers, and then we were up in New Jersey, and then we were on the Queen Mary, and then we were we wanted to move it into the continent, and then across Europe, and so on. So it was a long way to go, and I wanted to keep it so the reader could just keep moving. I've had people tell me, I couldn't put it down. It only takes a couple hours to read it. And they said, I wanted to see what happened next, and so that...
How did you do that?
I think that's good.
I mean, one of the things that I hear a lot of aspiring writers talk about is, how do I keep the reader turning the pages?
Exactly.
How did you do that?
I had no idea how I did it. I knew what I like when I read. I like to want to turn the page to the next page.
Exactly. And we'll be right back after these messages.
Orient House, family owned and operated since 1983, offers an extensive menu of Chinese and Japanese cuisine. Voted Best Asian Restaurant by Modesto B readers with 2 locations, 609 Tully Road across from MJC and 3318 McHenry Avenue across from Target. Be sure to try the daily lunch specials featuring garlic chicken or tempura. That's Orient House, great for dine-in or take-out.
And we're back with Jim Sanders, author of Saving Lives, Saving Memories.
You know, my wife picked up, what's his name, book on Lincoln. And I read quite a bit of it. But I thought, you know, they must be just selling words, because, you know, our son said I didn't use enough adjectives, you know, but they were using adjectives like crazy in that book. And I finally, you know what happened to Lincoln, and you know what happened to Booth.
Booth, yeah.
So, I mean, you know, I wanted to cut to the chase.
But again, what I found I really enjoyed about your book is you're right. It is very focused and very succinct, yet you bring the reader back into the time. I mean, here we are over 50 years later, but when I read your story, I feel like I'm there, kind of looking over your shoulder. How did you do that?
I don't know, but that's what I wanted. That's what I wanted it to be.
Because you recreated the time. I
Yes,
mean, you
I
talk
did.
about the other side of time, but you brought us back into that time. You're writing it. Did you find as you were dictating and then editing that it was important for you to have a feeling that you were there again, for the reader to feel that?
I was there. I was there. When I went back there, I was there.
Okay.
When I went back to think of something, I was there. I could see it. In other words, the first load of battle casualties that we picked up were 4th Armored people. It was on the breakout from Normandy into Brittany. And the 4th Armored had not been in action. And so this was their first battle. And they hit this town called Rennes, R-E-N-N-E-S. And they got really hit because the Germans had what they call an 88 millimeter gun that they use for anti-aircraft.
Yeah.
Well, all they do with an 88 millimeter is lower it down and makes a beautiful anti-tank gun. And that's what happened. And I can still see when we pulled into that field on August 1st of 1944, it was green, trees around with the hedgerows, but it was full of wounded. And so we pulled up alongside other ambulances, and we loaded four litters in, 2 up here, 2 down here. And I can still see that man down on the right side. I can see him. I can see him. His head was completely wrapped up in bandages and bloody. And before we closed the doors to go back up into Normandy to a VAC hospital, a doctor walked by and he said, "Pull him out, he's dead." And that was our initiation. That initiated us into, I mean, we'd hauled other casualties, but not battle casualties. So we pulled him out, put him gently aside, and put another one in. And I've always wondered, I'll wake up at night sometimes and see him again and wonder, who was his family? What was his name? You know? He's buried there probably, unless they brought him home. He's right there in Normandy. But he had to be probably 20, 19, 18,
A young
whatever.
man like yourself over there fighting.
There he is.
But you see, listening to you speak, Jim, I can now see how easily you translated that into writing. I could see what you were talking about, and that's what I saw in your writing.
Well,
You write as you
that's
speak.
what Martha captured. That's what my wife said. Martha captured what you said, or what you were.
Exactly.
And Martha even says it's one of her better books.
I think you've captured an important part of the autobiography in writing a memoir. You wrote in your actual voice. You didn't buff it up and tweak it and fancy. I mean, this is you talking to the reader, and that's what really comes through. I think that's one of your arts as a writer. You may not have known it, but it really is.
I didn't know it. I didn't know it. Now I have been lucky to get these into house skills, into the libraries. I have a number of them. In fact, I have one in Ohrdruf, Germany.
Really?
Yeah. When I was there in 2010, in April, I took some books. And I met the mayor of Ohrdruf because the day that Ray and I went down to look at Ohrdruf, somebody ordered us to go down and see this place. So we drove in. And just as we drove in, quite a few Jeeps came in, and we could see they were all high officials. So it was Bradley, Patton, Eisenhower, Walton Walker, and so we left soon after because there wasn't anything for us to do there, just to see what was there, which was nothing but bodies. And the mayor and his wife, Patton ordered the townspeople to come up and see this. And they came up, and the mayor and his wife went home that afternoon and committed suicide. Now, on this trip in 10, the mayor and his wife, present day, came up. He gave me a book in German, and I gave him one of these books. So he gave it to the English teacher in the high school, and she writes to me now. She uses a book to teach English to her German kids. She wrote me the other day. It was her birthday, and
You're teaching English, but also history from a really important perspective when you
she
think
says
about
it's been. He said the kids have all enjoyed it. Well, you know, I didn't say anything really bad except about the Holocaust wasn't too good.
Well, question, you obviously read. I mean, I know in addition to writing, you're also very much a person who enjoys reading a good book. In your opinion, what makes a good memoir? When you're reading different authors, what do you look for memoir that's going to interest you and keep you wanting to read it?
If it's their memoir, I want it to be truthful.
Okay.
I mean, if it's not true, if it's not the person, you know, it's just fiction. But I like fiction too.
You said you did a tape where you did your preliminary run through when you were recording your story before you started transcribing it. Did you consciously make a decision to organize the memoir basically in the entire sequence?
Yes, I did. That's the way I wanted it.
Okay.
And I had to get Martha to back up a number of times. I said, no, this goes over here. You know, this needs to be in here. This didn't happen then, it happened over here. So I wanted to keep it that way so they could flow. The reader could just flow along. Here we are in France, and here we are going to Verdun and Metz and up to the Battle of the Bulge and over across the Rhine, and you know.
That was essential then to the story.
For as far as I was concerned,
Okay.
it had to be.
Now, a lot of writers who are working on memoirs, what advice would you give to them as a fellow writer? What do they need to do? Should they, for example, you structured it along this series of events. What guidance can you give to other writers that will help them improve their writing skills if they're writing this type of book?
Well, you know, I don't know if they're going to write it themselves. Then they've got to decide: is this going to be a true story? You know, and if it is, then they have to start and make it flow. Make it flow. If someone else is going to write it for them, they still have to make it flow. I'm proud of the way Martha did this because it does sound like me.
It does. I mean, I didn't realize she had helped you work on it until you told me about it.
Oh, yeah.
Now, when you were editing it, did you find any challenges as an editor looking over this story and having to refine and sharpen it?
Oh, yes. We edited it a lot. And Mark Haskett was as good as it. You know Mark, don't you? And he was also the graphic artist that got the pictures in there. And he is also what you would call the publisher because he had the ISBN numbers, and you know, he gave me one of those. And so we're known by an ISBN number.
You are now numbered. Jim, what has it been like? I mean, I've seen you speak at service clubs. I've, as I mentioned, bumped into you at book signings. You're in demand out there.
Yeah.
What is it like telling people about this story and hearing their reactions and feedback to what they've read?
Luckily, the feedback has all been good. I've had people come up and tell me, "Oh, I really liked your book." I said, "That's great. Did you read it all?" "Oh, yes, I read it from the cover to cover." Well, it's easy to read from cover to cover. Now, you don't need a dictionary to read this book. Now, Brendan Phibbs, you better have a dictionary with you.
Okay.
Because he uses words that you don't normally use, and he speaks in 3 different languages. So every once in a while he speaks in German and he thinks you know it, and you don't.
Oh,
you know.
Okay.
But so it needs to be, well, you know, every old soldier has a story. And somebody gave me a journal the other day of a soldier who had, he'd written a journal. And he'd gone to Army ASTP, Army Specialized Training Program, where they went back to college. And so a lot of guys, if their IQ was over 110 or something, they gave them a chance to go back to the college and take a couple semesters. But what happened to most all of them, they needed them as infantrymen.
Okay.
Battle of the Bulge. So they pulled him out, and this particular one, they put him in the 99th Division, and he was an infantryman, and he sold this, and he made it through. And then he came home and used the GI Bill to become a veterinarian. And he'd gone back and met some people that he'd met when he was young, and they toured the country and found the places he was. And now there was a story. He could have made that into a book. This journal could be a book, because it would be interesting to a lot of people, especially old soldiers.
Well,
There's young people that like this book too, which is amazing to me. Of course,
But
my
it's true.
grandkids will say, "Oh, Grandpa, that's great, you did that," but do you think they all read it? I don't know.
But I think it does, because of the way you told your story, Jim. And again, speaking personally, I found myself, I learned a lot, and I think that to me is what makes your book particularly special, and you as a writer particularly special. You created a story that people could learn from, personally as well as historically. I wanted to thank you so very much for being with us here today and invite you to pull the pineapple. One of our traditions with our guest authors is at the end of our interview, we ask you to add your book to our collection here.
Good.
And if you'd be kind enough to do that, please pull our pineapple and add your book to us.
How about if I sign it?
Take that too. An autographed book would be an honor.
Okay.
From, as you call yourself, an old soldier. And we want to thank our viewers for being with us today on Central Valley Writers Workshop. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have interviewing Jim Sanders and learning about his background and experiences as an author. To learn more about him, please visit the KAZV TV website. Meanwhile, Jim, again, a thank you for being our guest and sharing with us about saving lives, saving memories. I'm looking forward to meeting you again on the book signing circuit. For all of our viewers, wishing you a great day, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Claudia.
So when I was reading your story, a big part of me was thinking, I saw the remnants of World War II. You lived World War II, and you experienced
Yes,
that.
we
That
did.
was incredible.
And we also relived some of World War I.
Yes, you
we
did.
got to Verdun, and the battlefields from World War I were still there. The trenches, the barbed wire, bits and pieces of helmets
Yes.
and so were still there. And this was like, what, 20-some years after?
And in the 60s, the remnants...
Can you imagine how weird
Yes.
and mankind is, that they'll continue to slaughter thousands of people year after year?
Yes.
And we thought this is the end, and it never is the end. It continues today.
Sadly, someday we'll learn. I can only hope for that.
I thought that too, but now I believe that mankind will not ever be able to love his neighbor.